How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's LUMIX Live. We've got a whole lot to talk about today, and as the title says, we are going to be joined by Matt Frazer very shortly. But we want to get some of the normal stuff out of the way first. If you are new to these live streams and you have a question that you want us to address, make sure to tag at LUMIX USA, like you see many doing in the chat. It helps Matt and I just see the questions a lot easier against any of the background conversations that are happening, so we can try to address as many of them as we possibly can today. We are planning to run this stream probably for around like an hour and a half, maybe a little bit longer. It kind of depends. Both Matt and I have some other meetings that we have to get to after this, which, you know, clearly streaming is fun, but we also have regular jobs that we have to do as well. So as we get near the end of the stream, we'll kind of feel it out for how long we're going to run on this one. But before we get into the kind of nitty gritty of the conversation, I want to remind those of you in the United States about LUMIX Pro services. We have the Red and Platinum tier available for anyone that's purchased a new camera. If you've recently purchased a new camera, or say you've got the S1RII Mark II on pre-order, make sure to keep an eye on the LUMIX Pro Service website. You can either follow the QR code that's on the screen right now, or I believe I put a link down in the description. If not, I'll update the description for that. This way you can get your camera registered. The S1RII Mark II will end up getting added after that camera starts shipping, so don't worry if you don't see it right now, because you need some information from the box to be able to register, so just keep that in mind. The free tier, the free membership is the Red tier, so that gets you your 3-year extended warranty and all of the kind of setup into the system should you ever have a problem with your equipment. But we do also offer the Platinum tier as well. That is a paid level service for those that want maybe a higher level of service and support. Maybe you're a little more demanding on your equipment, or you just like a better peace of mind. Within the Platinum tier, you're going to get 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs. That's if you drop or break something or it happens to be out of the 3-year warranty. You also get access to the membership hotline, so if you prefer to speak to somebody, you have an option for doing that. And you also get annual sensor cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all that kind of fun stuff that keeps your equipment in the best shape possible as you move into either your working season or, as I said, if you're just someone who prefers to have that level of service and support in the back end. If you're in the US, I encourage you to take a look at it. As I said, you have the QR code right below me, or I'll make sure that the description gets updated with the links for it. So, one last little kind of housekeeping thing to let everyone know. If you have questions about future products or future firmware updates or anything along those lines, we don't answer them. We don't have answers for you. Even if we did, both Matt and I enjoy being employed, so we will not be addressing those. I'm sorry if that's what you're here for. Maybe stick around. You'll learn some cool stuff. Chat with those that are in the comment section as well. And yeah, let's kind of jump into this. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hi, Sean. I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing just great, man. It's been a kind of fun week, I think. Long week, but fun week since the
Yeah.
launch of the S1R2, for sure.
Yeah. Camera launches are like Netflix drops of major television series I like to watch. So I effectively end up like binge watching these like reviews.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so
Big shout out to like Richard Wong's like cinema pieces.
yeah, thanks. Thank you, Richard, for the biopic on the S1R2. That was a watch. I watched every minute of it
Oh
too.
yeah.
So yeah,
Nah.
I love Richard.
Yeah, this kind of stuff is fun. It's always exciting when there's new new product, hardware, software, whatever it is that comes out. And I think, obviously, as we were talking last week from the office, doing just kind of a quick, hey, let's just do an AMA. There's a lot of stuff I know that kind of, as everyone knows, like you and I both have our wheelhouses of what we're kind of more experienced or more knowledgeable in. And there's a lot of video conversations that people have been having. And honestly, even just like a lot of some of the tools and functions in the cameras, as you and I were talking about ahead of time. So
Yeah.
I think it's awesome that, you're taking time to join us on the stream this week, and most likely next week as well, maybe.
Yeah, I think we have something planned. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, let's kind of jump into it. We've got a couple things that we want to talk about that we have prepared. I've got a whole fresh setup. It would help if I turned my camera on. We got a whole fresh setup so that we can all be talking about this stuff, and we can show you all what's kind of in the camera as well. But to start this conversation, I want to do some questions from the chat. And our good buddy Cliff has peppered us with a good amount of questions to start with.
He gets in right away, Cliff. Right away.
Oh, yeah.
I got it.
Yeah, always on top of it whenever Cliff's in the chat. So thank you, Cliff. So the first question, and I'll pose these to you, Matt.
Okay.
The S1R Mark II, are the 5.8K and 5.9K modes oversampled or binned?
They're oversampled. The only time the camera really bins is at 120 frames per second. So even when you're doing like 1080 video files, they are oversampled as well. So again, until you get to 120, well, I shouldn't say 120. I'm an American. So once you get past 60 frames, so when you get to like 50 frame or 120 frame, that's when it begins to bin.
Yeah, yeah. And to be clear, there's 100 frame or 120 for people.
Yeah.
Cool. So Cliff's next question was, are all internal ProRes RAW modes all cropped at 1:1 pixel readout?
ProRes RAW, yes, that would be correct.
Yeah. And so people know too, there's different methods that I think companies have taken about addressing ProRes RAW as to whether or not you do the actual closest to RAW that you can get, which would be 1:1 pixel readout, where you're doing no manipulation to the image prior to it being, or the data prior to it being sent to the recorder, versus some of those that do kind of some processing to maintain field of view, but then you have to question, is it? Yeah.
It's usually binning, typically, is what they're doing. Or
Yeah.
line skip.
Yeah, so then you have to kind of ask yourself, is it technically still raw because it's partially processed, like all that kind of stuff. Our approach has always been image quality and fidelity first, so we're going to take a literal stance on some of this stuff, and that's just where ProRes RAW is with our system. So
Right.
if you've been
But
using the
remember-
LUMIX cameras, this isn't new.
Yeah, but remember, we will be offering an firmware update, so you can do it over HDMI. So if you want an 8K RAW option, it'll be there for you over HDMI to, it appears it's going to be both recorders. Again, we have pictures of it with both recorders, so it's kind of making a leap that it's going to be both. But until we get there, we won't know for sure.
Yeah. Cliff asks, is external SSD maxed at 2 terabyte or 4 terabyte on the camera?
So Sean, I have not tested 4 terabytes, but I am 99% sure it's still a 2 terabyte limit.
Yeah. I have tested it. Our file structure and system is at 2 terabytes. So that would be like the CF Express card or the SSD. SD cards, it's a little questionable now because usually in the manuals, we're going to stay like 512 gig. Because when you start to go to like 1 terabyte or anything bigger than that, one, they're still very uncommon in the industry. And two, from what we've been told by various different manufacturers out there, the higher the capacity of the card, at least with current kind of structures, the way they're getting to those capacities, you usually end up taking speed hits with those higher capacity cards. So you kind of, I would say as far as SD cards, we're probably in like a gray area right now where, because they're not ubiquitous in the market, you're not seeing manufacturers kind of really openly support them. I've understood that there's nothing in the camera that's going to stop you from putting a 1 terabyte card in the camera, unlike CF Express or SSD, where it'll tell you like you can't use this because it's different file structures, CF Express and SSDs versus an SD card. So.
Hey, and you know what? There is something that'll stop an SD card from working in there if it's 1 terabyte. That would be if it's a UHS-1 card that is 1 terabyte, which we've seen some rather. Whoa, hey, I'm playing with lens caps here. I've seen some rather dubious memory cards out there that are like above, 64 gig and above that are UHS-1. So yeah, that's not going to work.
Yeah. And this next question from Cliff says, does APS-C crop mode change the read clock, faster, I'm going to assume, Cliff, you mean things like rolling shutter in APS-C. So,
I mean, naturally, if you look at the read of the sensor at open gate, when we go from open gate to 16:9, because the nature of the sensor is to read from top down, it will be faster. So if we go to a smaller region of the sensor, it would be faster as well. So if you do like a 1:1 4K, you should expect it to be faster.
yeah. Yeah.
But I will say this. Sorry, I'm gonna
No, you're fine.
try the camera first, Cliff. I think you're gonna find that the rolling shutter is not any different than what you're getting on the S5 II right now. And actually, once you get to 4K 60, it's a pretty noticeable update in terms of its readout speed. So, uh, look, I obviously there's a lot when we look at specs that we concentrate on, and it's important to see those specs because they can kind of tell you what you can and cannot expect from the camera. But if you're an S5 II user and you're happy with what you're getting now, I don't think anybody's going to be disappointed with the 4K 30 or the 4K 24, or the 5.8K 30, 5.8K 24, or even the 8K 30, as long as you're not using the dynamic range expansion function. The dynamic range expansion function, that's when things get slower than the S5 II. So
Yeah.
that I'll get off my soapbox on that.
So, is here, Tobias says, hey again, welcome back, Tobias. Will there be a compatibility list for CF Express SD cards for the S1R Mark II? What would be the minimum requirement for A, shooting up to C4K, or B, shooting in any mode? Thank you. That list should be published already, up on the compatibility website. We always try to get that out like day of the announcement. Honestly, I think your general kind of goals would almost always be the same for any camera, right? You're going to be spending a decent amount of money on cameras in general. For some people, it's a ton of money. For others, maybe it's not so much money. Why let media be the weak link in your chain? Spend on good media. Spend on fast media. We often forget that fast media doesn't just help the pipeline in the camera. More importantly, it helps your offloading times. So using like good CF Express cards, I think Matt and I have been using the either the SanDisk Pro Cinema cards, which personally I really like, and also some of the next storage. I think it's the B2 Pro series CF Express cards, and they've been like spectacular to work with.
And Sean, just one other note: there's nothing going on in the S1R2 that is faster for data than the GH7. They're basically going to have the same peak data rates. So if you can't find online the S1R2 list, just look at the GH7 list. It's going to be the same certified cards.
Yeah. Really good point. Really good point. This one from Unreal Sensor, I want to kind of address a little bit here. It says, is it true that the processor in the S1R2 and the GH7 isn't powerful enough to use the full power of the sensor? And I want to answer this in maybe a bit of a sarcastic way. So, fact of the matter is, if you look at what we're able to do with sensors and within our cameras, that is, I would say, independently commented as better than what most others are doing. Not across all products, but in many cases. Our engines tend to be very, very powerful. You do run into cases where the sensors themselves, the architectures that these sensors can do, push further than necessarily the bounds of what the physical construction of cameras, of what all of you typically are requesting and demanding from manufacturers can do. So, is it true that there are certain scenarios where maybe on paper, hardware could potentially do more as far as sensors go? Sure. There kind of almost always is. But if you also look at like full readout, like information about sensors, you'd realize that all manufacturers are not utilizing full potential of the sensors as they are. All manufacturers have to find a balance of power, thermals, what's actually practical within the market. So I think just saying that the processor isn't powerful enough is kind of a half answer or a half comment about it, because all cameras run into these things. I think based on what the designs are for the various cameras across the board, and this is true for all camera brands, based on what the design goals are for the product, no, they're not underpowered. They're properly powered. They're doing what they're supposed to for what the design goals of that product are. So,
one other kind of quick point in this too. We also have to take into account editing flexibility and ease. So we want to make sure that what we're incorporating in the camera can be edited with existing nonlinear editing software. That also plays a pretty big role in what we choose to do. So just one example of this is why we don't do an H.265 422 color space. We do a HEVC H.265 420. And the reason we don't do 422 is that we like our customers and we don't want them sitting there forever waiting for an edit to be able to be processed, because most GPUs still can't accelerate 422 10-bit color on an HEVC encode. So these are also things that we have to take into account whenever we're working within the engine. So, it's very possible the engine can do more than what Sean and I know it can do, but there may be codec considerations that are being considered when we do this.
Yeah. It's always funny, from even our position where, Matt and I talk with a lot of our engineering team and our product teams, like, there's times where even we feel like, hey, I'm going to put my internet commenter hat on, theoretically it should be able to do this. And it's like, well, no, when you actually have people that their job is to work with these things and they come back and they're like, no, theory's one thing. You kind of forget about X, Y, and Z, like loss in power or efficiency or all those other kinds of things. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, makes a lot more sense now. This is why I sit online, and usually you don't see engineers sit online answering questions like this. It's kind of like that scene from The Office Space.
Yeah.
Let's hear. Al says, could a request be to have streaming built into the Flow app? As any streaming requires the phone connected anyway. Ironically, Al, the LUMIX Lab app, which is our other app for our systems, does have the live streaming function through it. So if you do plug in your camera over USB or do it over Wi-Fi, you still have access to the RTMPS streaming functionality. Flow is a very different concept of an app. We kind of alluded to it about, that we're going to have a stream next week with some cool topics. So we're not going to dive too much into Flow today, but we will talk a lot about it next Thursday. So I encourage you to take set a reminder for that. I'll have the link up for the stream right after this one. And we'll describe like all of the workflow tools that we have across the board. From like Capture One, Flow, Lab, Frame.io, even Tether. So.
But Al, I think it's a great idea. So I'm going to take a different approach, and I will actually email the person who's working on that project and ask them about it, because I do think your perspective makes sense. Yep. It's a pretty, I can't promise it'll be easy or it'll be possible, because Sean, I don't write the code, but I see where you're going with that. I don't think it's an unrealistic request. So let me make the request, and worst case, you don't get what you want, and we just move on and we use LUMIX Lab.
Yeah. Let's see here. McCary is here. How's it going? Glad to see you back. It says, please develop Panasonic brand lens for wildlife, 600 millimeter or greater. MFT has many official options that support dual IS. Obviously, like as far as like future products go, we obviously don't talk about anything from our lineup of optics or cameras or firmware or anything like that. But I will say, and I mentioned this on the last week's stream too, Sigma's lenses that are 4L mount are first party. Yes, I know we still have a lot of that, brand lens to brand camera equals first party. The L mount, it's taken a little bit of time, but I think we're kind of finally breaking through and kind of getting that point across that Doesn't matter which of these lenses you use, especially with the Sigma series, because dual IS does work. And Sigma did just drop that 300 to 600 millimeter, which is I can't wait to get my hands on with it. And I know nothing about shooting really long telephoto, just because it's going to be fun. Plus, you can use teleconverters on our system with that lens.
Yeah, actually, so this poster actually posted like 3 times in a row, Sean. So there
Yeah.
were questions about dual IS, which I'm glad you covered. The Sigma lenses have dual IS, so you can absolutely use both. So be our guest. We're happy to have you do it.
Yeah.
There's another one about battery and having a higher capacity battery, kind of like what we did when we went from the 19 to the BLK22. And I want everybody to understand that the BLK22 is a very energy dense battery. So Sean can confirm, we had battery engineers from the Tesla factory at CES. And I'm like, oh my God, I gotta go and talk to these guys because I have this wild hair about getting the battery densities up higher. Sean can confirm this. Like, if you want to talk about battery chemistries and, hey, graphite rich anodes or pure graphite anodes, I'm your man. I can tell you everything there is to know from a layman's perspective on batteries. So I'm talking to the battery engineers. And when we actually did the measurements on the battery, they were like, yeah, even if we went to the one of our batteries that is silicon anode based or partially silicon anode, we could maybe bump it up an extra 5% at best. So the question I would pose back to the community, would you be open to us just building the batteries inside the cameras so we can get rid of all the plastic and the controllers, and then we can start building up, we can increase the densities, and there's other things we can do charging wise. But I don't think photographers are going to want to have their batteries built in and then have to be forced to charge like they do with their cell phones. So I think I pose that question to the community. You guys talk about it and decide where you think Panasonic should go in the future. So I'm using you as a forum right now to help understand what we should do.
As always, drop your comment down in the comments after the video. Helps with engagement and also, let your voice be heard on some of this stuff. All right, I want to pause questions for a minute because there's a couple things that Matt and I wanted to kind of cover about the camera that we both have found, since we've been working with the camera for a little while, that I think a lot of you probably would have some interest in knowing before you either get your cameras or before maybe you decide to make your purchase of the camera. And the first one I want to start with, fancy new overlay, by the way, is actually talking about, what kind of happens knowing that, we have the battery grip now on the camera. And actually, let me put a fresh battery in the grip. I was using the camera for photo shoot earlier today.
Yeah, so we're talking about the BG2, which is the new battery grip for the S1R2.
Yeah.
So just to get that out of the way.
Yeah. And basically, we also want to clear up some of the conversations that have been happening online about, what you need to require to record to SSD and various frame rate things and all of that. So we have a couple different options. In fact, Matt, you're going to hate me for this, but I forgot to pull out my DCC-18 for this. So we'll just do this with the battery and the grip because it does the same thing. Is that while yes, there are certain modes, it's only a handful of recording options that would require the additional power that the battery grip provides you to record to an external SSD. There's a lot of thought that went into how this kind of works. When we talk to some of the videographers and photographers that we've had conversations with prior to the camera launching, one of the concerns was, well, if I'm going to record to an external SSD and I need this additional power supply, or I need this additional power budget to work with, what is my backup scenario? Am I going to be, because I can't power over USB into the camera because that port's taken up by the SSD? Well, that's where we talk about like DCC-18. The DCC-18 is the battery eliminator that terminates in a USB-C end. So you're able to plug it in, you can run power off that, and you're good to go. But If you have the battery grip and you run a battery in the grip and a battery in the camera, you don't need anything else other than what's right there in that package. So you're going to get a nice handhold on the camera because you get a bigger grip and everything's fun there. But you have certain, like, very specific video modes that, yeah, will kind of require some of that external power supply. And one of the things that's kind of cool about this is that as I'm looking, kind of through these modes, and Matt, I think I'm going to put it in, what do you think, 5.8K?
Sure.
Or 5.9K maybe?
So you have the battery grip connected now, right?
Yeah. So let's do 5.9K and let's do 60p. So 5.9K and 60p, and hopefully I don't blow up my A10 Mini. Hopefully it doesn't freak out, which I think it might have. Let's do this. Switching some of these frame rates on an A10 Mini is not always a fun experience here. Actually, I might not be able to do this with the A10 Mini. Joys of not testing this particular one beforehand.
Yeah, our goal was to show you what happens when you remove the battery while it's charging.
Yeah.
So while Sean's doing this, I'll explain what we're going to do. So, all right, so let's talk a little bit about power with the camera. So there are very specific resolution frame rate combinations that can require a higher voltage than what the battery can deliver on its own. So, or the power regulation the camera can deliver on its own. So one way of getting past that is you can just pull the battery out. You could give it the DCC-18 like Sean talked about, and then plug it into a 9-volt 3-amp power source, USB power source, PD power source. Or, as Sean said, put the BG2 on it, and then you can have a battery in both the grip as well as the camera. That combined power will give you enough power to offer those extra record options. And keep in mind, this only affects the external SSD recording. So again, this only affects something that most of our competitors don't even do on their camera. So there's going to be some give and take. And we had to do this with the GH7. The GH7 can't do 4K 120 unless you have it on the DCC-18. That's just a limitation in that camera as well. It's sort of the limitations of working under the architectures we're working on right now.
Yeah.
But we never had a battery grip solution for the GH7. So now that we have this battery grip solution, we had to think about how are we going to save your data? What happens, for example, if you have a DCC-18 in the battery grip and you have a battery in the camera and you're using the DCC-18 as the power solution and someone walks by and accidentally unplugs your DCC-18 from the wall. So I think that's what Sean's about to demonstrate now.
Yeah. So like right now you can see I've got the S1R Mark II recording to an SSD running the 5.9K at 60 frames per second. This is one of those modes that requires the external or an additional power source, whether that's DCC-18 or the battery grip. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to take the battery out of the grip. So this is going to answer probably a couple people's questions here. One, I just opened the battery door, and you get a notice on there that says like, "Hey, this is you're using this battery. Please stop. Think about this." So that it's giving you that warning to say like, "Hey, this battery is required for the mode that you're in." But if I drop the battery out, which I just did, it stops the video recording. You now see in the bottom right of the screen that battery bar is empty because there's no battery supply there. And that, excuse me, couldn't get to mute fast enough. That file is now stored and saved. So unlike situations in the past where, you may have some concern about, well, if I need this and I pull power, what happens? It doesn't just up and cut the video. It closes the video file, saves it, and then you're good to either replace the power source, replug in if you need. And it's good.
And by the way, if you had the DCC-18 in there and you just unplugged it, we wouldn't have had the door open. So some people say, well, the door is what's getting that warning that we may have to wrap it. Nope. If you
Yeah.
pull the power off the DCC-18, the exact same behavior. It'll wind down the recording. There's enough residual power in the capacitors in the camera to do that for you.
Yeah.
So it'll wrap that recording. On the other end of the spectrum, though, if you have the battery grip on there and it doesn't require both batteries to power, or it doesn't require the DCC-18, well, if you unplug the DCC-18, it's just going to automatically switch to the internal battery and just continue to record continuously. So whether you
Yes.
pull the battery out or whether you unplug the DCC-18 out of the battery grip, it will continuously record in every situation other than when it needs both batteries to power. So we just wanted to make sure we covered that with everybody so that they understood why we're doing this. And again, just to make sure you understand, this is only an SSD issue. Everything can be recorded to the internal media without fail.
Yeah, yeah. And so like I'm doing a 4K 30p all intra option here right now too. And again, I've got the battery door on there. When I open the battery door, you see I don't get that warning. If I pop the battery out, it hasn't stopped recording. I can then swap a new battery back in, or in this case, just push the same battery back into place. Lock the battery door, because I don't like having the battery doors open, and you see that it's uninterrupted in the clip. So the engineering team put a lot of effort and thought into making sure that that system is pretty well protected from kind of having any kind of problems. Now, something to be clear about this. We are talking in terms of using genuine Panasonic batteries. We have no responsibility or statement of compatibility with third-party batteries. So,
or third-party battery eliminators for that matter.
yeah, or third-party battery eliminators. So if you're using non-genuine batteries, which communicate a ton of information to the camera, life, power supply, voltage, safety levels, all that kind of stuff, if you end up not seeing, running into a situation where, it does cut the footage or you run into problems, odds are it's the fact that it's not a genuine battery. I don't say that as a pitch to say buy genuine Panasonic batteries. I think in general, again, this goes to like that memory conversation. If you're going to be using genuine products, you're spending this amount of money on products in general, buy the right stuff for it. The only power solution that I would say is like a super reliable external that we don't make is the fact that the USB port supports the PD power standard for 9 volt 3 amp. So as long as the companies that you're buying those batteries from are being truthful and following a set specification, you'll be fine in that regard. So yeah. Let's see. I saw a bunch of another questions come here. Kofi's here. How's it going, Kofi? Kofi says no internal batteries, please. There you go, Matt. Kofi has spoken.
Let me talk to you later, Kofi. So I have seen some stuff about the XLR2 with 32-bit float. I know that was a topic we wanted to cover anyways.
Yep.
And I think might be I think there's some confusion a little bit here because I see somebody saying if you add the XLR2 and select XLR and mic port, it disables 32-bit on the XLR port too. That's kind of true, but kind of not true. So I want to make sure we fully explain what the XLR2 is capable of. So yes, if you were going to bring audio into the camera's 3.5 millimeter port and then channels 1 and 2 into the XLR2, you are correct. That would disable 32-bit flow, but that's not how you should do that. And the only reason that option is even available with the XLR2 is because the XLR2 is being made backward compatible with some other cameras. And when it's backward compatible with the other cameras, we won't be able to do what I'm about to show you now, which is Sean is showing a new 3.5 millimeter, I should say Sean is showing a new 3.5 millimeter port on the XLR2. So you should be bringing all the audio into the XLR2. None of the audio should be going into the camera. And then once you do that, Sean, let's go ahead and show kind of what we can do with that.
Yeah. So you'll see right now, since I just installed the XLR2 back onto my S1R Mark II, you see that we get a couple different, kind of changes here to the overall menu. Now, these are all going to be in the main video options here. And sorry, I don't have a tripod set up, so the camera's going to move a little bit. You'll see that you get the options here for sound rec quality. This is where you're able to change how you want the different, kind of mixes of the audio to be, depending on what Matt was describing below. So if you want 4 channels of 32-bit float audio, one, what Matt said, make sure that all of your inputs are going into the XLR2. Don't put anything into the camera. So your 3.5 millimeter input would count as, I think, channels 3 and 4. Your XLR1 and XLR2 would count as channel 1 and 2, and that's how they're mapped in the solution we have, which I'll also show you the audio solution that we have, or the menu system here. But when you want to record 4 channels, you do 48 kilohertz 32-bit, and that'll get you 4 channels of 32-bit float audio.
Yep.
You will get a notice that says, like, hey, just as a reminder, this is a bigger file. And they are substantially bigger as far as an audio file goes if you strip it out of the video file. But just kind of keep that in mind. Nothing
They're like
is
Kofi.
free.
They're like Kofi. They're bigger and they're better. So that's their benefit. Sorry.
Yeah, and then what you'll see here is, so we have 4-channel audio recording, which by default is going to be set to off. You would just come in here and you would select XLR, because we do enable the ability to do a 4-channel mix with the 3.5 that's on the camera. It depends on what your goals are. If you don't need 32-bit and you're using, say, the XLR1, this is where you're going to have XLR plus camera, because that only had 2 XLR on it. So you would need to have your 3.5 in the camera. If I select this, and then I go back up to my audio info, you'll notice that under sound rec quality, it drops to 4824, because that's the maximum you can do based on the internal audio recording. Which means if you're not using an XLR adapter, you're going to get up to 48 kilohertz 24-bit audio through the 3.5 on the camera. If I go back down and change this to just XLR, and I go back up, you'll see I can do 4824 for 4-channel, but 4832 with 4-channel. If I want to do 96 at 32-bit, you'll see that that's off. It's disabled. That's where you have to come in and say that I'm just doing 2-channel, and that'll work on either the 3.5 as your channel 3 and 4, or your 2 XLR channels. You can't have all 4. You would just pick which of the inputs you want on that particular system.
And there's one more note on the XLR2, and this is because it's a new function. So Sean, you got to remove it from the old you there. Oh, product shot. Good job. Sorry. I saw a little red Coke can. All right. Can you flip it around and show there's a switch for which channels you're going to be using, whether it's the 3.5 millimeter, or it's going to be the XLRs, or it's going to be XLRs plus the 3.5 millimeter. So just make sure that you have it set correctly as well. Otherwise, that creates a problem. I had a few folks contact me who were evaluating the S1RII with the XLR2 and didn't see that little switch.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the basics about, with the XLR2, how you'd want to kind of, in general, just keep in mind if you want to work on it. The other thing is, we've had some people ask about this, about audio monitoring, because obviously we've got audio levels that show up on the bottom of the camera. They're kind of right there. By default, these audio monitors are going to show you channel 1 and channel 2. If you are using the channel 3 and 4, which would be the 3.5, you just have to kind of come in here, go into your sound monitoring channel, and you want to kind of, make sure that you're monitoring the right channels. So if I have something in the 3.5, I would want to make sure that I'm monitoring that channel, since I don't have this set up right. The other thing that you can do, and I will sacrifice one of my custom functions for this. We're going to go into the custom function settings, which again, just press and hold one of the buttons that you want to customize here. And we're going to go into the audio settings, and that audio information screen that we launched with the GH7 is now, or actually no, GH6 is included on this camera as well. So you'll have the ability that you can, at a push of a button, pop this menu up. You can view up to your 4 channels. So if you've got your, channel 3 and 4 plugged in, you'll be able to see your levels there. And you have the ability to kind of just tap into any of these settings and make adjustments where possible. So it makes a really, really easy way to get in here and make a bunch of changes to your audio setup without having to dive in through the menus, if you just program one of your function buttons to audio information.
So one last note on levels. So Sean, you and I have played with the XLR2. We
I use it a lot.
Yeah, we won't go back. When was the last time you monitored audio levels now that you have an XLR2?
I honestly never at that point. I just fix it. I just adjust it in post, and I don't scream and I don't whisper.
Not that would matter either. Anyways, with 32-bit float.
Exactly.
So the only reason I do it is I just put on a set of headphones real quick to make sure my mic isn't scratching on my shirt or whatever. So it's just to make sure that there's not some weird noise that's being caused by the microphone. So 32-bit really kind of fundamentally changes how you're using your levels in general. I mean, we don't even give you a red or a yellow indicator when you're in 32-bit float because there's really nothing you can do to adjust it. So
yeah, and we've said this before, and I think if you follow anyone that does, kind of audio commentary or commentary or reviews about audio devices too, is that with 32-bit float, as far as being able to, one, record it directly into your footage, which is kind of the big benefit here. You don't have to worry about recording it to an external device, making sure that file names match up, remembering which clip has to go to which video file. All of that stuff gets avoided because now this is just embedded in the video file. It's just a much simpler process with it, with one thing that I've already had a couple people say. They're like, well, 32-bit float, I've clipped it before. You're not clipping 32-bit float. 99% of the time, you're not clipping what 32-bit float can contain. You are overwhelming the capsule on the microphone that you're using. I did this test when we first got the XLR2s. I took my Rode wireless mics onto my motorcycle, and I have a relatively loud exhaust on the motorcycle. I went right next to it, plugged into the camera, into 32-bit float, and my naive little mind was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to be able to pull this level down. Nope. Not at all. It overwhelmed that capsule so quickly that I ended up taking my NT1, which is the studio microphone, brought that out there, powered it, since the XLR2 can provide power to the microphone, held that in the same spot, and was able to recover it. So it's all going to come down to the microphones that you use. It's not a silver bullet, but it's a really, really solid option, especially if you're a wedding and event videographer and you don't want to have to necessarily worry about it, or you're doing podcasts or conversations like this. It makes the workflow a heck of a lot easier, and that's one of the things that we do with a lot of our cameras. I think I mentioned this on the B&H stream. We're at a point, I think, in camera technology that we have to start looking at the workflow side. How do you work with these cameras to get them into your workflow? What makes it easier? What steps can be taken? And we'll talk a lot about that next week. But this is kind of more from a hardware perspective. 32-bit float audio, it's kind of a no-brainer to include within the cameras now. Yeah.
And yes, I see a couple of things here, and then we'll move on to 32-bit float. For us to do 32-bit float inside the camera, we would have needed a different processor that could actually do it, and we would have needed a double analog stage. So you have to have 2 analog stages, one that that will have the volume attenuated, one that has the volume at normal level, and then it's all muxed together. We just don't have that processing power to be able to do that in the processor, and we didn't want to put the extra audio fit stage if the processor can't do it. So, we're clearly looking at ways to, enhance 32-bit float. I'd like to point out, by the way, we're like the first guys here. We're like the explorers getting here for the first time. So it takes time to eventually get things downsized to the point where it can go inside the camera. So, just bear with us.
Yeah.
But honestly, the XLR2 is priced very similarly to an external recorder, and it takes an entire step out of your editing process to use it.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a bunch of, to shift gears a bit here, I saw a bunch of comments, they were way up earlier in the chat, about things like false color and some of the other things that we have in the camera. So for one, before we talk about false color in the S1R2, I just want to make it very clear. We will not comment on whether or not things like false color or any of these things can come to other cameras in firmware updates. I appreciate you asking the question. Continue to feel free to do so, but we don't have an answer for you. But that brings a bit more clarity to the whole idea of false color within this camera, right, Matt? Because we do something pretty cool with the way that it's used, especially for vlog.
Yeah, so let's first, can you make sure the camera's set to like the standard picture profile or
Sure.
something, it could be Cine Like A, whatever.
Yeah, let's go to Cine Like A too.
Just not log. Okay.
Yeah.
So right now we're in Cine Like A, and when Sean hits the false color indicator, then the little purple areas you're below black, and then the green areas where you want flesh tones to be, it's like your 18 gray, and that's all communicated specifically to log. I'm sorry, not to log. In this case, Cine Like A, the Cine Like A profile. So every picture profile that we build into the camera, whether that's the standard picture profile, it's Cine Like A, Cine Like D, they will each have their own sort of calibration for how the false color function's working. Okay. Now, the real question that should be asked is what happens when I use this with vlog? Because if I have vlog and then I turn on a LUT, so Sean, let's go ahead and go to vlog, and then we have a LUT on now. So why don't we do you mind turning the LUT off real quick just so we can show them for sure that the LUT is off, and now the LUT is on.
Yeah,
Okay.
so here's the LUT off.
Yeah, now go ahead and turn the LUT on. So the question people should ask is, well, when I apply false color, am I false coloring my LUT or am I false coloring log? Because I don't really care about the LUT, I just care about log. So Sean, can you quickly kind of point to the screen where you can see the vlog monitoring is on?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to show it here, but it's right above where my index finger is.
Yeah,
so you have the color profile, and then right next to that, you'll see it'll say HDMI or MON with LUT. I have a HDMI out LUT going on right now so that you can see it on the stream.
Yeah. Okay, so right now you're seeing it, a LUT applied, and it's going out the HDMI, and it's also going to the monitor on the back. Now, Sean, go ahead and hit false color, and everybody watch that little indicator when Sean hits false color. Do you see how it went away? Because we don't need the LUT right now, you're not previewing a LUT, you're previewing false color applied to log. So that's how we do this. So every time you turn on false color, we turn off the LUT. And then when you come back, we turn the LUT back on again. So that's how we make sure that our false color is working the way that you would expect it to when you're dealing with log files.
Yeah.
And so that brings up the question of Sean. I never really tested this, but have you tried doing this with Real Time LUT and seeing what happens?
Yeah, so the concept of false color, keeping in mind everything that Matt just described, that it runs because vlog, you can monitor a LUT on it, but we remove that LUT to show you the false color, is not available in the real-time LUT function. There's a very specific reason for this, isn't there, Matt?
Yeah, so Sean, what he was doing, it's hard to see, but he was trying to turn on the LUT and it's not even letting him do it. So, or he's trying to turn on false color, it's not even letting him do it. That's why the camera's shaking. That's because we have no idea what you've done with that LUT. We have no clue how it's affecting the shadows, the midtones, how you're coming out of gamma. We don't know any of that. So we can't apply false color to your LUTs and have it work correctly. So that's why you can't do that with our system.
Yeah. Yeah. So just kind of bear that in mind in how you kind of want to work with the camera. Because again, with something like real-time LUT, it's the idea that you're going to be using, a look that you've already kind of created. So you're probably already going to have an idea of like, hey, look, this is where I need to set my white point, or my gray point. This is where I need to set my skin tones. So this is where I'd say if you're going to use Real Time LUT, this is where, okay, maybe false color isn't the tool that you're going to use, but I'm going to come in here and I'm going to use something like, come on, luminance spot meter, because I can use luminance spot meter. Now it's not going to read out in stops because you're applying a 709 or Rec 2020 look to it, but it's going to give me my percentage, which is going to be pretty similar to set this if you've got a gray card or skin tone or whatever that you're setting for your midtone. Set it to be at 42% and you're going to be right in the ballpark. It may not be the most perfect, but yeah, it'll get you the same effective tool, just a different way of doing it. And that's why we build all of these various tools into the camera, so you can make as many of these changes as you want on the fly. So let's get this out of that. I'm actually gonna put this in hybrid log gamma because I really like hybrid.
Hey Sean, somebody's asking why your shutter angle is at 216. It's because he has LED lights that are flickering. So he sets it to 216 so he doesn't see a flicker in his LED lights behind him. So
yeah,
hey, that's a lesson for anybody who does car and automotive YouTube. Please, for the love of God, set your shutter speeds correctly so I don't see flickering headlights and taillights anymore. Please, please, please stop doing that.
Which is also funny because I'm pretty sure I've seen like some major car brand commercials that have the flickering LEDs in the commercial that makes it to air, and I'm like, oh no, ouch. FC asks, does false color work with non-vlog recording? Yes, it does. I'm gonna make sure I time
photos. It even works for photos.
Yeah. Now, hopefully, I don't break my ATEM switcher here again. Go into photo mode. I think it did. Actually, I should be clear. This is not an ATEM problem. This is a Streamlab and an OBS problem. When you switch the inputs, it tends to freak out a bit. So, like, right now, I'm back in the photo mode. So now I can toggle my false color on here. And, yeah, I can use it as a way to judge some of my exposures in photography. I think there was another question about, like, waveform in photography, right? As something that I know Matt and I have been big proponents of. We want to see waveform in photography as well, too. But truthfully, after having this, I don't really care about waveform anymore. I just want this.
Not for portraits. Not for portraits. Not for photos.
This just tends to work better in my opinion. So
just easier.
Yeah. So let's get.
All right. Let's go ahead and we can move on. I think we've false colored out everybody on the stream. We're losing people. We're losing attention.
Attention's gone up since we started talking about this, Matt. I think it's just you being here, man. People have missed you on the stream. I've missed you on the stream.
It's because Dustin Armstrong's in the chat. That's why he and Kofi bring the energy. So.
Oh yeah.
And by the way, I'm not able to see. I'm trying desperately not to look at the channel that often. So.
It's okay. Actually, one last question on false color, because I think this is actually a very good thing, because it's something that I don't think I've seen anyone show online either. So the question is, so how do you expose vlog with false color? It's a great question for someone who's never used it before. What's cool within our camera here is, so if I go into the settings here, and I pull up the false color option, which is going to be under the gear icon, under the monitor display. It says photo, or in this case it's video, because remember on the S1RII you have the photo video switch. The name of these menus will change. When I go to false color, I have a false color index that I can use here. So the way our camera is set, vlog is set to expose your neutral gray, or 18%, to 42 IRE. Or in this case, 42%. Right, roughly. So what that means is that if you're trying to expose with false color, you want green to be what is covering that part of the image that you want to be at that exposure value. And then you use this scale going into pink, going into yellow, then going into red, or all the way down into pink. I'm a little colorblind, so I think that bottom one's purple to me.
It is purple.
Okay, all right. So you use those colors to then determine where those areas are lying on the scale, the IRE scale, or in this case, percentage is how it's listed in this particular case. But you have a tool in the camera that will help you. Um, truthfully, I think once you spend like a day using this, you end up never having to look at the scale again because you know which ones are the important pieces for you, which I believe would be blue. Was it like blue, green, and like yellow? Red, if you see red, it's you've clipped the hell out of your whites, they're gone. If you see purple or pink, you've crushed your shadows, they're gone. You're not going to get them back. So, yeah. So, with that, let's take a look here. What resolutions are you able to transfer over the Lumix Lab app for video? I have to double check that one. Honestly, I haven't used the Lab app for video transfer on the S1R Mark II yet. I can check. I can take a look at that, but we are going to be talking about the apps and the workflow stuff next week, so we'll make sure to have that as part of our conversation there, Jason.
Yeah, but to be clear, it obviously isn't limited to MP4 Lite, which I think is the point of what he said. He said, or somebody earlier said, is it limited like the S9 to MP4 Lite? It wouldn't be limited to that because this camera doesn't have MP4 Lite. So it's going to be limited to what's in the MP4 range. Sean and I just want to quickly test to make sure it can do 4K or if it's just 1080. So
Yeah.
it'll be in the MP4 options.
Yeah. Phil says S1R2 records internal ProRes RAW. Is that limited to only one resolution? Is it possible to record DCI 4K pixel to pixel? It is limited to one resolution. You have 5.8K internally to the CF Express card or to an SSD. We do not do any of the other resolutions, so there's no 1080 or 4K ProRes RAW internally. Very specifically, because we talked about this before, just in case people weren't here for that particular part of the conversation, because our approach for RAW is pixel to pixel, coming from a 44 megapixel sensor, 4K pixel to pixel or 1080 pixel to pixel would be such an aggressive crop that it kind of defeats the purpose of using them, especially in a camera like this. So it's 5.8K. That's what you have. Externally over HDMI, we have mentioned that through firmware, we're going to be supporting 8.1K and 7.2K. We haven't given any kind of clear resolution values or anything like that yet. But we have a good reputation with firmware, so sit tight for when those things come out.
And just remember, a 4K crop would be effectively a 2 crop. So it'd be like a micro four thirds crop, and then 1080 would be really, really, really small. But I do want to point out one thing since we're kind of talking about this.
Yeah.
So for those of you who would like not to have a binned 4K 120, there is an option for this, and we don't really make it very clear, and I don't know how many people stumbled upon this. I didn't see any reviewers talking about this, but if you put the camera into pixel for pixel when you're in 4K 120, that'll get you a non-binned 4K 120 at a 2 crop. And I've noticed a pretty substantial improvement in the autofocus when you're there as well. So just remember that if you want very pristine, non-binned and skip 4K 120, you can do that with the camera. Just put it in pixel for pixel mode.
Cool. Kofi says Sony has an IRE value range for skin tones at about 48 to 52% and a middle gray IRE at something like 41%. It's a point different from Lumix. Is skin tone IRE the same ballpark? I'm assuming the same.
They're going to be pretty close. We're within like a couple IRE of each other in that regard. It's really just going to be more how we handle the shadow region and how we start to get into the higher, like as we get into the super wide region. That's where the distinctions between our log curves are probably more obvious. And honestly, let's be real here. The way we come out of Gamma, whether it's the Canon, the good Canon log one, as everybody calls it, or the Sony S log 3 or ARRI log, we're all kind of working off the same rise out of Gamma. There's some minor changes there. Where the big differences really come into play has more to do with the color gamut and the things that we're doing with color gamut that are going to be very different from what Sony's doing with color gamut or Canon or ARRI. That's where those things become more obvious. It's less about how we're rising out of Gamma it's much more in the color gamut.
Yeah, yeah. I see Jason is in the chat. Welcome, Jason. I think it's early for you where you're at, so thanks for joining. All right, let's see. Run through maybe a couple more questions here, and then Matt and I got a couple other things that we want to talk about with the camera itself for today's particular stream. Again, as a reminder, we're going to be doing another stream next Thursday about workflow, so we'll be talking about things like Capture One and LUMIX Flow and LUMIX Lab, Frame.io, and even LUMIX Tether in things that you can do with these cameras. So we're getting a lot of questions about timecode with the S1R Mark II. And I think I want to use this as kind of an opportunity to maybe level set certain things for some people. The S1R Mark II is our hybrid camera. So it is the camera that is designed to be the solid photo camera that isn't diminishing anything in photography, with a solid video camera that's appropriate for the hybrid use case. I think a lot of people get into a point where they look at every camera and they say, well, this needs to be a cinema camera, or this needs to be this category of video product. When it kind of goes out of where, if you look at what we talk about when we make these cameras, these are designed for that person that needs to be able to do both across the board. So things like timecode, if you look at historically with us, timecode is something that you find in the GH line of cameras or in like the S1H when it comes to jam syncing timecode into the product, or even the box cameras. So on this particular camera, yeah, you don't have timecode jam capabilities on this camera. It will send timecode over HDMI, and we talked about this, I think, a couple of streams ago, where I showed you how you can set timecode to be time of day, or kind of, and have it run that way. So just to be clear, this camera doesn't do timecode in. So there's no way to do it through USB or microphone input or things like that. The XLR2 doesn't add that. I just want to make that clear. This one just doesn't have that.
Sean, let me provide. There is a workaround. It just depends on. It really comes down to what your timecode workflow is.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're utilizing devices like the Timecode Systems product, the Tentacle Sync product, or the product from Deity, those products will embed a timecode signal into like the left or right channel audio signal. And then they'll bring audio in, and they can record audio into the device, or you could just have audio into the your left channel and then have timecode on the right channel if you need. Or you combine it with the XLR audio adapter, and you can bring timecode into the camera that way, and then just don't use 32-bit float. That won't work. But you can bring timecode in that way. And then you use software to sync it all up. So there are ways to bring timecode in. It just depends on what your workflow is. If you're asking, because you use an audio devices, audio recorder, and you're a sound guy, and you want to be able to just take a BNC connector and jam timecode the old-fashioned way, that's not going to be an option here. But there are workarounds. There are ways to do it. You just have to look at companies like Timecode Systems, which is at Atomos Timecode Systems. It's Deity, or it's Tentacle Sync.
Yeah. Let's see. A couple other questions came through here. McCary says, is it possible via firmware for HD 240 with AF? 2 reduced megapixel mode options for faster burst, reduced buffer, sustained write speeds. I honestly, we don't have an answer, McCary. We'd have to see what engineering thinks. I think like normal, I think if you drop that in the comment section afterwards, we can reference that to the engineering team and say, hey, this is something that people are asking for. And then we'll just kind of go from there with that particular one. Michael asks, is there live composite or live view composite on the S1R2 for low light and astro? I am so excited to say that yes, this camera has live view composite. I love using it. I've done many 3-hour long exposures when I was out over Thanksgiving. It's awesome. again, I'm going to definitely make a stance here and say, again, we are the only full-frame camera that does this. So if you are shooting any kind of long exposure, light trails, star trails, if you're doing composite work with light painting, you don't get a better camera than a LUMIX camera for doing that stuff. I will stand tall on that one.
You can also blame Sean and I for not putting the slide into the PowerPoints that we gave to the folks who got early access to the cameras. It was just never in the PowerPoint, which is why it was never mentioned in most of the reviews. So
yeah,
blame me. That's on me.
Yeah, sometimes, you end up going into with some of these things, and there's so much information about the cameras, and a lot of times we also fall into, I think, a habit. I think everybody does, where it's like you kind of just expect certain features to be there, especially with us. So yeah, it's there. You've got it. It's awesome. I love it. I can't wait to see people's photos taken with it. It's so cool.
So Sean, just really quick, because Bojangles keeps asking this question.
Oh yeah.
Concerning 65:24 aspect ratio.
Yes.
And whether or not it's going to come to other cameras. That number one, Sean has already said we can't say whether it will or will not come to other cameras. I promise you, we have asked if it can be added to the G9 Mark II. I can promise you it's been asked for. We are aware of the desirability of having the 65:24 mode in that camera. We get it, but we have asked. We just don't know if they'll add it. Or if there's like a technical reason why. It's highly unlikely there's a technical reason, but it's been asked for. So I just don't want you thinking we're ignoring you in the chat.
Yeah.
We have asked. It's not, I'm not just saying that to placate you either. I have specifically asked. So we are well aware of the desirability of that.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that, like with McGarry's comment about no live composite in the S9 as well. We've asked as well about live view composite on the S9. That one may be a technical limitation. I'm not sure, but know that like one, it's one of the reasons why we do these conversations and why we have these streams is that while there are things that an engineering team or product planning has in their mindset for how certain things should work, for what's important within a product, the feedback that y'all give, because you're the actual users of these cameras, of these lenses, of these products in general, the feedback you give us gets them more information to put things into perspective sometimes. Like all major companies, they're not always the fastest to be able to make changes and move. So you may be talking about and requesting some of these things now, but it may take a lot of time to evaluate, is it even possible in the hardware? Is it possible software-wise? What are the results if it is possible? Do they meet the standards that you have set for that specific product? All of this stuff goes into play to determine whether or not a feature or a capability is something that a product can do. The last thing that we want to do is push something to the camera as an update that breaks something, that, breaks your Bluetooth or breaks your Wi-Fi or bricks your camera, things like that. We're not in the habit of pushing firmware updates that damage your camera or keep you from being able to use it. So I would say it's definitely a case of it's better to have the proper testing done, and if something can be done into a camera that is a positive for everything, cool, there's high consideration for it. But it also comes down to whether or not that product is designed for that particular need. All of those things go into designing these products. So let's see here.
And by the way, Phil, yes, I do know you guys are asking for timecode because it's what's missing from the S1H. Yes, Sean and I are well aware that's why it's being asked for. So I just want to make sure you guys know there's alternatives.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sean, what else are we missing off of our list that we wanted?
So
our rhetoric that we wanted to make sure we got out there.
Yeah, right. So first, Kofi says, I just want a LUMIX podcast with Sean and Matt. Honestly, I mean, hey man, Kofi, anytime, man. Like you wanna just like get a podcast together, and like the three of us will do it, and like we can just put this show on the road. I'm sure Matt and I've got so much time to do it.
We will literally have tens of people wanting to watch that. So.
Yeah, right. On our list, we've got talking about custom modes, because we briefly talked about this last week. But Matt, you brought me up on a good point that I overlooked last week with how many you have.
Yeah, so this is sort of like this is my OCD kicking in. So we have C1 through C5. And then when you flip the camera from photo to video, it's a completely new set of C1 through C5. And then if you go to S and Q, you have another set of C1 to C5. And that's what everybody's been saying, but that's not true. So let's talk about what you can do. So under the C5 option, you actually have as default three C5s. So that's seven total Cs you have. But you can actually add more than that. So Sean, show them how you can add more than that.
Yeah, yeah. So if you want to add
So
more to it, you go down into the wrench icon. So this is your main settings icon. And then you're going to scroll down to the gear icon in here, and you'll see custom mode settings. You're going to go into this option, and you'll see out of the box it says limit number of custom modes 3. Well, if I click into this, I can expand this all the way to 10. So now, when I go into the menu and I go up to that C menu,
and
I
to be
got,
clear,
yeah,
that C menu will only be there when you're in C5. If you're in like
yes,
C4 or C3, it won't be there. It'll only be when you're in C5.
yeah. Yeah, so this is what opens up that additional set of custom modes that you have that are part hardware oriented, because you've got the buttons on the actual camera itself. And yeah, it makes for probably, I'd say, the most customizable from a mode setting of any
And you can
camera.
name them. And you
Yeah,
can name them too. So if you want to change the titling and everything, you can change them so they can be your, 4K 120, your 5.8K 60, however you want to split it up. City like A, city like V, whatever. You can have at it.
yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool the way the C modes work. As far as like more detail with how everything works across the board with the C1 through C5, I'm working on a specific stream about doing that, like showing you all the steps as to how you can customize each of these modes. Most likely that's going to be a partially recorded stream, just so I can make sure that I get my thoughts together, that we get it, each of the pieces that would be required to talk about it. So, McCary, to answer your question, I'll have that as a separate video that will actually kind of dive in. This way, it also is a little bit easier to find as a reference later on, instead of in these like longer live streams. We have amazing support on the LUMIX live streams. Our one of our members. Oh man, I'm terrible with names because I know just usernames. But yeah, we have amazing support. The mod for the LUMIX subreddit goes through these videos and puts the timestamps together if I don't get to them first. So thank you so much. Highly appreciated. I encourage everyone to show some love over to the subreddit that is moderated and run by him. So thank you again. But yeah, we'll have more detailed stuff on custom settings a little bit later.
So Sean, have we gotten to
Yeah.
everything on our list?
The only other thing on here, Matt, is you had told me to write down this flip monitor option. Can you
Yeah.
explain what that is?
Yeah. This is a great feature that's horribly hidden. It's impossible to find. But it's something I've asked for years. So there are times where I got to mount a camera upside down, but I need to be able to flip the screen so I can see it correctly from behind the camera. Or if I'm using, there's certain kind of probe lenses, like super macro lenses, they're actually derived from microscopes, and they don't flip the image upside. They don't flip and rotate the image. So I have to do that flip and rotate. So this has been added to the camera, but it's horribly buried. So let's talk about how you navigate to it and then a way to kind of shortcut it. So just go into the camera's menu. Sorry, I have to do this along with you.
Yeah,
I don't even remember exactly where it's at. Sorry, Sean.
that's okay. It's
So
under the gear
it's
icon.
in the wrench, it's in the gear tab under the sub tab monitor display. It's the first monitor display option. It's called LVF monitor display set. Just rolls off the tongue. What a great
Oh
name.
yeah.
And what you'll see now is the ability to flip the image horizontally and also flip the image vertically. So Sean will probably just do that for you real quick. I don't know if it's going to do it actually over the HDMI, but
Actually, yes, it won't do it over the
yeah,
HDMI.
it's going to just do it on the LCD screen on the back of the camera. Um, so that option is available to you from the camera's menu, but I think it's easier if you really need it to program it to a just like a function key. So Sean's going to show you where it is.
Yeah. So you just press and hold one of the function buttons that you would potentially want to assign to this, and then image flip monitor. And then as you press those, you'll see, obviously because we're outputting over HDMI, it's not going to do this. But you see the little identifications on there that say image flip off, it changes to auto, on, and then it cycles through each of them. So depending on however you've got your camera positioned, this can be a really solid option if you have to articulate the kind of tilt and full free angle rear screen in a very specific way for you to see it the way you've got your camera rigged up.
Yeah.
This lets you just kind of go in there and really make sure that you've got it set the way you need it and can ignore the kind of auto triggering for the positioning of the screen.
Even for even when you're doing low photography, you got a tripod where you're putting the tripod arm upside down so that it's close to the ground. Now the camera's upside down. You'll be able to see that screen pretty easily. It
Yeah.
just makes rigging up your camera much simpler.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a great feature. It's like one of my favorite little hidden features in the camera.
You got to get out more, man. Just want to give a shout out. Connor McCaskill and Cam Mackey have joined the chat. Love to see a bunch of y'all here. And honestly, to everybody, to all of you that have been tuning in and, giving us like this awesome chat, awesome conversations between each other. I like that, the vitriol is being kept very in check. I do have a relatively moderation on the chat here. So, yay. But I think, kind of given the time that we have here, so we were planning to go for about an hour and a half on the stream. Just double check my notes here. Oh, we have time to talk about proxy settings actually.
Yeah, let's do that
before we wrap up. So one of the requests that came actually a lot from those of you using the S5 II, the 2X, or any of the cameras that we added proxy video recording to, was that our existing proxy system would always output a 16:9, even if you were shooting in 17:9 aspect ratio. So on the S1R Mark II, you now have, when you go into the proxy settings, they now match the aspect ratio that you're going to be recording at. So right now I have the camera set to a 16:9 ratio, where if I come up here and I say change this to a C4K option, let's do C4K. Obviously, I get the black bars on my capture here, but when I go into the proxy record settings, you'll see now that these are 17:9 as well. So minor little quality of life updates within the camera here, so that, again, what you're recording, if you have to work in a proxy workflow or you prefer to work in a proxy workflow, it's just going to be that, much easier for you. You're not having to worry about those, the different aspect ratios when you're trying to link your footage back together later.
And again, to define the problem a little bit, just so everybody understands kind of what's going on. When we shoot in C4K, we're literally recording a 4096 width by 2160 height image. And what we are doing right now on the S5 II is we are keeping it a 1920 by 1080 image, and then we're bringing it down just a little bit. We're not making it a 2K image, we're making it a 1920 image, and then we're adding letterbox bars, which means when you work with that in a proxy edit, and then you bring in the new file, it clips the sides of the image off a little bit because it thought it was going to be on a 16:9. I thought it was going to be on a 17:9 timeline. It's really on a 16:9 timeline. So this is just to correct that issue. And you'll also notice that there's no 720p option for Proxy when you're in C4K, that gets grayed out. It's not an option anymore. That's because there is no, cinema aspect ratio 720p standard. So we just shut that off. It just didn't
Yeah.
make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see here. Let's take a last run through some of the questions in the chat before we call it for today. JC says, what suggestions you have for OpenGate and IBIS on the S1R2? Some users say they work together in some modes. So, JC, the IBIS system works in all of our modes that you have on the camera. Same with the electronic image stabilization. So you can use certain electronic image stabilization, especially like if you're in OpenGate. That's where like cropless will work. And that's where one of the things where you're going to have, that's one of the things where it's going to be on LUMIX lenses. We don't know if this is something that would ever be able to be done on Sigma or Leica or other L-mount partner lenses. Matt and I are not in that echelon of the engineering team to know what those conversations are, if it's even possible. So sorry, we don't have an answer for you. But yeah, you can use those in the 8K or 8.1K OpenGate, even the standard 8K options. All the other modes, you have full access. So you've got things like the high electronic image stabilization that you can use there. And honestly, I think, Matt, one of the things that you were excited about was electronic image stabilization for anamorphic support now, right?
Yeah, it's my understanding. First off, we added the ability to do EIS and then a high setting EIS for anamorphic lenses. But more importantly, we had challenges with EIS, well, frankly, with image stabilization in general, with anamorphic lenses, because they're squeezing the information this way. They're not like spherically squeezing it. So when it's cylindrically squeezing, what you end up with is if you allow the sensor to roll, you end up with this kind of warpy sort of look to the image when you have an anamorphic lens on it. So we're now using that geometry correction function that we've added to our EIS to be able to correct that stuff out. So when you use the EIS function, you now get, again, a roll axis, which we didn't offer before. So you really get a pretty substantial improvement in the stabilization system just overall by doing this. So, and then one final note on the whole sort of cropless stabilization. I personally don't see a lot of reason not to use cropless all the time, but there is one sort of side benefit to doing this. And that is because when we are making a geometric correction, right? And what we are doing is we're looking at the movement of the camera. So we are always measuring what direction the camera is moving. Is it panning left to right? Well, if there is some rolling shutter effect that's being induced by your pans, a cropless correction is actually geometrically correcting a lot of that back out again. So one thing to consider doing is just keep your cropless on all the time, because it will improve your perceived rolling shutter. Now, that's not going to help you if you tripod mount the camera and you got a subway going past. But for your camera movement, it can certainly help and make things a little bit better for that. So just a little extra piece of advice on what we're doing there.
Yeah, yeah. So, Matt, I don't know about you, but I think it's probably about time that we wrap up this stream today.
Yeah.
I wanna just again thank everybody for your comments and your feedback and everything that y'all have down in the chat here. If we didn't get to your question, or we didn't get to your comment, or if you have a comment that you want us to see afterwards, drop it in the actual comments after this video, since those stay. The live chat, because it's a live chat replay, you have to watch the video to the point where the comment was made. So likely, unless you're going to watch the whole thing, it's hard to remember what the, like when a comment was made. So I implore you, if you've got a comment or question that we didn't get to, drop it in the chat below. It will help us find them. It also gives information for Matt and I to be able to address questions maybe on next week's stream. It also helps us be able to point engineering and marketing teams and planning teams and all these different groups so that they can see what it is all of you talk about, what your questions are, what your opinions are about these products. That's why we do these streams. That's why I'm so excited that we get to do these streams. I want to thank you, Matt, for taking the time. I know you and I have a lot going on when there's a product launch, but being able to take time and join, and obviously the chat loves you, man. It's just great to have you back.
Well, you know I'm a ham in front of everybody on these things, so I love doing them. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
And again, thank everybody in the community for all their feedback. We never take your feedback personally, even if it's negative feedback. We always view it as a way for us to improve and to make our products better for you guys. So keep providing us the feedback, and we'll keep funneling it up. And hopefully you'll get to see one of the changes that you've requested from Panasonic make it into some future firmware.
Yeah. So thanks everybody again for tuning in. We appreciate it. We will be back next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Matt will be joining us. We were working that out before we went on the live stream, and you're not going to want to miss that one. I highly encourage you to make sure you're here when that stream starts. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's all about apps next week, so be there, get your questions in, and yeah, have an awesome day, have an awesome weekend. Get out there, create some cool stuff. Actually use these cameras that we all talk about in the technical sides and stuff. If you create some cool stuff, share it to us, show us, tag LUMIX, tag LUMIX USA if you want Matt or I to see it. And yeah, outside of that, peace. Later, y'all.
Bye, buddy.